Welcome back to the Global Mindfulness and Education Summit. I am Dr. Chris Willard, one of your two hosts, alongside Helen Maffini, who's been doing these wonderful summits for a while now. We are speaking with people all over the world and who are doing work all over the world. And our current guest is Kevin Hawkins, and Kevin is the director of and founder of MindWell Education. He's done a lot of work internationally, working in international schools all over the world. He's also the author of Mindful Teacher, Mindful School, which is a fantastic book. And I had heard about Kevin a little bit from our mutual friend, Leanhart, with Arbor Education seminars in Germany. We're both over there doing work frequently, and had heard about some of his work. And then we had the pleasure of presenting together at a conference in Austria last year and just hit it off so well with him and Amy Burke, his partner, and just had a great time. But I'll let you have a great time as you listen to Kevin a little bit. So Kevin, do you want to just introduce yourself for our viewers and share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, as you said, it was really great to meet you in Austria and Götzis at that conference. And I felt we had a lot of things that we're on different paths, but doing similar work. And it was very exciting to see your presentations and hear you speak there too. And yeah, with Amy Burke and another friend, Cara Smith, and another friend, Kristen Fort-Cantonese, we co-founded MindWell Education probably about in 2012. And at that time I was working as a middle school principal in an international school in Prague, where I was there for about 10 years as middle school principal. And I eventually left that job to do this kind of work full time in the end. But for a while there, I was beginning to teach students in the school and parents and teachers, and then presenting at conferences, and then made that move to just doing this work full time around the world. And I previously had worked in Africa and Tanzania and in the UK. And so we already had between us quite a lot of links with international schools. So that's where we first started this work. But then bit by bit, we've been working more and more with state school teachers in different countries around the world, which is really exciting development for us now to be able to do work both in private international schools, but also in public education too.
Absolutely fantastic. And you've been traveling so much too in the last decade. I mean, and even before, of course, doing your work with mindfulness. But let's back up a little bit. Could you fill me in a little bit? One of the questions I'm always curious about for people is what was your first experience of mindfulness? Maybe your first experience, doing a retreat or something like that. But really, I think back on my childhood, and I think as educators, it's interesting to look back for ourselves of childhood experiences that were maybe something like mindfulness or something contemplative. Do you have any experiences like that you'd like to share, and then share a bit of your journey into more formal mindfulness and learning this in a more formal way?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. So, I did have my first formal introduction to meditation in the 1970s when I was on that hippie overland route to India. I didn't go meditate. I just ended up with some Indian friends that I was staying with, and they went to the ashram like you would go to church, and I went with them. And
wow,
there was no instruction. I just kind of did what I thought everybody else was doing.
It's just sitting here, that's what everyone else is doing.
It's kind of weird because I can tell you that later with time, but it was an interesting experience, and I kind of just got into it almost by mistake, I guess. But if I think back to my childhood, there was a time that comes to mind when I had, I guess it's probably typical of, a lot of early adolescent, young teenagers. I was probably, 11 or 12 years old. And of all things, I was doing my chemistry homework, right? And I wasn't very happy at school, and I certainly didn't like doing homework, and I really didn't like chemistry. But it was just a strange situation. I was getting ready for a test, sitting at home in our council house in south of England. Saturday morning, everybody else was out. I was sitting in the front room by the fireplace, and I was struggling with this, trying to remember these notes about chemistry classes and everything for the test that was coming up. And something just happened. And I don't know what it was, whether it was the quietness of the house, because I was just kind of focused. but somehow the whole room and the whole of everywhere seemed to go very quiet. It wasn't that I wasn't thinking, there was a lot of cognition going on. I was, focusing on these, trying to understand my own notes about these experiments we'd done. But as everything went quiet, it's like everything came sharply into focus. The notes that I was looking at made sense. And more than just words on a page, they were like a window into helping me understand what had actually happened in the classroom, what we'd done in the lab experiments. And I began to really get it, to understand it.
Yeah.
This lasted for quite, an hour or so, and I was really immersed in this experience. And in fact, in a way, I think that was how the beginning of me learning how to learn. I went from the bottom stream, up to the highest stream, as the stream in schools in those days. Somehow I engaged better in what I was doing. But the interesting thing was this sense of calm that came out of nowhere and surprised me doing my chemistry homework.
Yeah. And I often think kind of about looking at the history of education or ideas and innovation, and whether it's a true story or not, right? Archimedes was in his bathtub when he had his eureka moment, right? Not at his desk. Sir Isaac Newton, again, probably not a true story, but like the story we tell is that he was sitting reflecting under the apple tree when the apple fell, and he had this insight. It's these moments of quiet, these moments of peace, and then even if you look at where our education system, at least in the West, but also I think to a large extent in the East, developed, it is out of a monastic tradition, right? Of studying and writing and reading and learning how to do that in these really quiet, silent environments. And that's where, right? That's where learning takes place. That is what primes our brains. Maybe if we look at it from a neuroscience perspective, to do that learning, to have those insights, to think more creatively, so we can make those connections that maybe we can't make if we're just trying to grind it out somehow, but getting in touch with that silence. And that's where, right, the magic of learning can really start to happen, right? That's where we can, light the spark, right? Yeah,
I think there's more to understanding, the learning process than we fully understand. But certainly my experience has been sometimes that I don't study very well, but I've had experiences learning language, learning music when I'm relaxed and awake, when things just seem to click and I pick up things a lot more deeply and more quickly, So how we learn, we're all different, aren't we? But for some kids, trying to force it and focus doesn't really help. But that knowing how to be relaxed and alert, which is what you train to do in mindfulness, is a predisposition to learn well, I think.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's getting to that sort of right level of, both alert and relaxation. There's this, between a kind of 6 and an 8 out of 6, between 6 and 8 out of 10 is the Yerkes-Dodson curve of like where we're supposed to be able to really maximally focus and perform at our best. So yeah, absolutely. And then when did you start to become interested in mindfulness in a more formal way and start to pursue mindfulness? How did that come about?
Well, I think that trip to India got me interested because I had some very strong experience. People talk about peak experiences, don't they? But then how do you enable a practice or experiences to really become part of you? And I kind of thought I'd seen very clearly myself and my position, my family. I went back to England after that trip. I'm going to be totally different, experience more off, But it had whetted my appetite. So I did go to some formal classes at actually it was a Buddhist center where I was living in London.
Oh, wow.
Did a little bit of training there. And I've got to admit, from then on, I was pretty sporadic. I got interested in physical areas because I think, the body connection is so much a part of it, isn't it? So I did Tai Chi and I did yoga over a long period of time. And the meditation, I kept trying different, ways of doing it, different methods and different people, without really feeling I was progressing a great deal. And to be honest, what I think probably like many people, what really got me into it in a formal way was suffering. It was
it is.
Much later on in my early 50s, when I was going through a very difficult period in my marriage, in my work, my parents were both ill and actually died, in a close period of time. And I had 3 teenage kids. I was struggling, close to burnout, I think, in some ways. And, somebody just lent me a copy of the book by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. And I just sat at home again, a Saturday morning actually, in Prague, at the kitchen table. I was on my own again, and I just opened up the first 2 pages. And that's all I read, and actually there was enough in those 2 pages to give me that real sense of calm and peace again. You know,
Yeah.
I know that, I need that very much now, you know, and it really, I think having had that introduction earlier on made a lot of sense then, that there was something there that I could use if I needed it.
Yeah.
And I actually from then did much more formal training in introductions to NDSR. I did some work on introductions to NVCT.
Mm-hmm.
I did online stuff. I went to retreats in Plum Village. Did quite a lot really.
Yeah.
Time. And because I was finding it so beneficial personally, I needed to process some emotions and deal with those, which I wasn't expert with, you know, and to deal with the grief. And I found that actually as I came out of this kind of darker period, that I was beginning to connect more with other people,
mm-hmm.
and to have a bit more calm about my work. And I actually, for teaching, I began to enjoy the connection with the kids more as well. You know, I was really beginning to reconnect, I felt, and I'd lost that kind of joy of teaching. So
yeah,
especially at that time, it really seemed to be a benefit to me.
Yeah, yeah. And then where did this start to merge with education, with actually starting not just for yourself to rekindle your own kind of spark with teaching and educating, but when did it start to translate to how do I even begin to teach this to kids or to colleagues? Like, where did that begin?
Yeah, that wasn't my intention at all, to be honest. But you know, when you're a teacher, very often you get a little bit of something you want to teach it.
Right.
Compulsion to teach too, which came.
I think that's really true.
But I guess it was more than anything. It was like, you know, these things that I'm learning for myself is pretty basic common sense. In one sense, these are pretty basic social emotional skills that somehow I'd kind of not really focused on earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I began to feel like if I could do this now, I had the introduction in India. What if kids had some awareness of it early on, that you could use some of these things at an early age?
Right.
I started to just offer it as a voluntary course in my middle school.
Mm-hmm.
Kids signed up for a 12-week course. I think with a colleague, Matt Hayes, we were originally just thinking about doing philosophy and psychology, because that doesn't exist in the curriculum, you know, in the years. But we're talking about 11 to 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
I wanted to offer that, you know, what do we know and how do we know it?
Mm-hmm.
I began to do a little bit of meditation training with kids then.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found out about the Mindfulness in Schools project in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
Annette and Chris Cullen, they were just getting going, and they weren't doing training, but I was able to use some of the material at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Far more skillful work than I'd done in my own way at school. That's what I started offering to middle school kids as you know, and really enjoyed doing that. The high school in our school decided they wanted it to be a compulsory course for kids because they stress, you know, so we started to teach that. I had a good friend and colleague in school, a high school teacher, Tony Ackerman, who helped me bring that into the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Then we began to offer to teachers, like, you know, do you want to know what we're doing with kids?
Right.
An school course for teachers. I'm not an adult trainer in that sense. I showed them the work we were doing with kids, and we used the Mark Williams book, Finding a Way Through Depression. It's a kind of practice book, you know.
It's funny because I recommend that book and MBCT so often, even to people that aren't depressed. I think it's one of the best, most crystal clear explanations of this kind of work, and the CD that accompanies it are also really great. And it's like, even if you're not depressed, this is so helpful. Yeah.
Exactly. That's before the Frantic World book came out. You know.
Right.
The teachers look at the title, but you don't have to be depressed to do this. It might help if you do, but you know.
Yeah.
Really beautifully done. Yeah.
And what was your experience with kind of making something compulsory? Was that a challenge? Like, and you know, what's your take on compulsory mindfulness versus invitational mindfulness? I always think this is an interesting question. Different places.
That's the thing, isn't it? You know, I always say to people when we're training, you know, mindfulness. Teachers to train mindfulness, you know, like you can't make anybody mindfulness. You know, it's something we all have that we can train to amplify, but you can't.
Right.
Forget about feeling that you have to make anybody mindfulness. You can just offer what you can offer. And the invitational sense is really important. And what we've felt was, even where it's compulsory, it needs to feel invitational, if you know what I mean. You know, it actually isn't, because the kids had to be in that room.
Right.
I want them to feel like we're going to make you do something that goes against your, you know, how comfortable you feel in this area. You know, we would encourage them to try something, to explore it, but always in our languaging and in tone. There was always this possibility to opt out. You know, we'd say, you know, I'm going to do an exercise here, and you know, I won't even know necessarily whether you're doing it or not. You could be thinking,
I love that. You could be fantasizing about the girl next to you if you want to. I'll never know.
Not exactly, but you could, yeah. But, so just that, so I feel like it works better when it's voluntary.
Yeah.
You know, when adults come to it. But I do feel that for kids, to have an introduction to it, you know, not to go deep, but is a valuable thing, because, like, for me, it means you know that if you need to kind of intervene in your own mental health at some time, that's possible, that you can.
Absolutely.
And there are techniques and things that you can learn to help you.
Right. You know,
interesting, with my voluntary kids in middle school, not all of them were voluntary. Sometimes the teachers suggested that they would
strongly suggest. Right.
And in the high school, you know, we did surveys after all the classes, and fair enough, that was our early days of teaching it. We didn't do the most brilliant job, I don't think, always, but, you know, so kids would say it was boring, you know, and it's not always exciting, you know, you're sitting in class, you know, you have to slow down, it goes against the grain a bit.
Yeah.
But even the kids that said they found it boring, I think it was over 95% said they recommended that other kids be forced to do it.
Wow, which is the highest recommendation in surveys of did you like this, is would you recommend this to a friend? Yeah.
Or it could have been, no, I didn't like it that much, it was okay, but I really believe we should all be doing this.
Right. Or if I had to do this, I'm going to make everyone do this.
That.
I have to sit through this. Right. Yeah. And it is, I mean, I do always find this really interesting, kind of like, you know, that question of how much do we push, how much do we pull, how do we invite, all of that. Yeah. What have you seen, like, really, you know, because you do so much work and consulting in international places, in international schools, like what are you seeing happening as you go to these different places? What are you seeing with the spread of mindfulness?
Yeah, I mean, it's really beautiful to be able to see, you know, lots of different things happening around the world, because, you know, we're fortunate that we worked in international schools, private schools, but also in state school, and even with state systems sometimes in different parts of the world. You know, so we're working, for example, in China at the moment, and we've been working with teachers in Switzerland, Germany, and Austria who are working in state schools. We've worked in Eastern Europe. We worked in Asia quite a bit. So, you know, we see a lot of similarities and differences. I think, you know, obviously the main message is that the context is important. So there's no one way to do this. You know, there's no one way to learn to find that mindfulness really works for you personally. There are various ways to approach it. And, you know, we see it being started as an initiative in very different ways. Very often it's started by a teacher who's really, you know, found it, like I was, of use to themselves personally. Occasionally it can be an administrator or a director, which isn't always the best thing. You know, there was some, you know, roses and thorns about being a principal and bringing that into my middle school. And, you know, a top-down approach isn't always the best for this kind of thing. Right. But I've seen it also in some schools, but it was a parent initiative. The parents who wanted to into the school. In the school we were working with in Switzerland, it was the HR, the Human Resources Department, who started, it was already happening. Oh, yeah. They wanted it as a main initiative to do with occupational health. Right. Sometimes we work with guidance counselors. We work with ISCA, the International Schools Conference. And that's a really good route, you know, because they're kind of at the heart of the school. Right, kind of a hub. The psychologists are often the first ones to be wanting it. You know, all sorts of different ways. There's no one way. But I would say the most common thing that when it does work and get embedded over time is that you have a champion teacher or a group of teachers, maybe one or two or three, who then get support from administration. You know, administration see this as something of value, and then they give some time and resources to it, then it can begin to grow. And actually, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a paper produced by Oxford Mindfulness Centre, or through some of the people from the William Koikin, but also mainly written, I think, by Stephanie Wild, looking at the Myriad project in the UK, what are the ways that seem to be working in schools and ways that don't?
Oh, I got to check that out.
Actually, and it came to a similar conclusion that we have this document called MindWell Pathways, because people are always asking us, how do you work to embed it? So we have a document, that's simple thing to try and give an outline.
Oh, nice.
Of ways into it, and raising awareness, and then moving into training and practicing and embedding and extending, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But that by Stephanie Wild did highlight that where it seems to work well, it's when you've got teachers who start it, and then administrators who support it and resource it, and then you begin to get some momentum. And I've seen in schools, you do that for a few years and it still doesn't pick up, and then it kind of circles around. Mm-hmm. Second or third spiral around, you get a critical mass of teachers.
Right.
Actually, we kind of look at how well it's working by how many teachers are being trained in it for their own benefit. Because
absolutely,
our whole thing is be mindful, then teach mindfully, and some people teach mindfulness.
Yeah.
And mindful is so much the foundation. So, and I think the power of this whole thing is actually for the adults in the building.
Right.
And then we can bring it to kids. But
right.
What we can do for ourselves is more profound in some ways.
Yeah, yeah.
So when that's beginning to happen, and some schools go too quick into the teaching kids without any training for teachers.
Yeah,
Some people, we're getting people to try and slow down a little bit and take a step back and look at training for teachers first, really.
Right. Live it. It's not like learn one, do one, teach one. It's like learn one, live one, teach one, almost with mindfulness, I think, in some ways. Yeah. What do you feel like as in your work with international schools in particular, or just your experience having taught in them, even before you kind of went full time into this mode, like what are some of the unique challenges or the unique opportunities? I have a feeling a lot of folks working in international schools are going to be watching this summit. What do you feel like is your advice for them about what are the challenges? My sense is that there's turnover often in those kinds of schools, but also that the other thing that means is that there's a lot of opportunities to start new things, but institutional memory can sometimes be a challenge. Those are just my guesses, but what do you imagine, or what have you found?
I think you're absolutely right. There is more turnover in international schools than probably in Texas. So it depends where the schools are. Many schools actually are governed by state regulations that limit turnover as well in different countries. But first of all, I always feel we have such an advantage in international schools. We're not often following curricula so closely. In my school, there were no external examinations from age 3 to age 16. They only started at age 18. So a scope there really to keep recreating what you're doing, and that opens this door to this whole area of emotional skills, social skills. To help us shift the focus of school to be a broad representative of human capacities and not so narrow. I think it's easier to shift that focus in schools. Turnover can be an issue, but also as more people get interested in mindfulness and teaching it, if you're known as a school that does it, you can also attract people to the school who want to train in it, or because they bring that with them as well. Right.
The person teaches in Dubai and does this, and then next thing they're in Shanghai 2 years later, and they bring it with them, and it spreads. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
So many schools are doing it now, are interested in it, that they can attract those people to it as well.
Yeah.
So it's a benefit in that way. And I think international schools do have a lot of advantages in that way. There's a little bit more scope of finding that space within the in the timetable. That's very often the sticking point, isn't it? How do you find the time in the day? But as you say, your average professional development, it's not like train the trainer and they train all the other teachers.
Right.
It's harder to build than that. So
yeah, for sure. And can you, one of the things I know that you're doing a lot of increasingly, and you've kind of alluded to this a bit, is working a lot with the teachers, working a lot with the educational leaders and school leaders. Can you talk about some of that work and where you feel like that's so important, bringing mindfulness and contemplative practice to school leadership, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, coming out of my own experience as a school leader, if I just start there, I began to find, as I say, it really impacted my work. Mm-hmm. It's simple but not easy to do. At first, I knew going into school, if I took a few conscious breaths during the day, during my busy day as a principal, I would, calm myself, my physiology down, and I would be able to focus better. So I'd have that intention, but I'd go through a whole day of that caffeine, adrenaline fueled. I don't want to stop. You don't want to slow down.
Right.
It's a while for that to work its way into how I was. And then when it did, sometimes I'd be walking down the hallway from one meeting to the next. And, usually I'm thinking about that meeting or preparing for that next one. But it began to happen sometimes without even consciously willing it, my hands would start to tingle or my arms would start to tingle, kind of reminding me that I've got a body. You kind of go back into the body, take a few steps, be present, and just can provide those little pauses in the day that I think make a lot of difference. So I find it very helpful, even with difficult conversations that I might have coming up with a teacher or a parent. You go into those as a principal with carrying so much stuff sometimes. But if it was a teacher, I might be feeling guilty that I hadn't spoken to them earlier about this problem, or angry because of something that happened with a kid, or
Right.
What I learned was, if you own those emotions first, do a little bit of reflection. Sometimes I talk to a counselor about it, middle school student counselor, or just sit for a moment, owning what it was that I was carrying. Then when I got to those meetings, very often it wasn't a power struggle. I get to the problem. I call it getting alongside. We put the problem on the table, put it together, and that teacher or person has to kind of go away and do some work with it.
Right.
It seems to diffuse that power struggle element. And so I find it applied. So I feel for principals, especially if you're a young principal, or you're thinking of becoming a school leader in any way. There's a lifetime there of stress, of course. Kind of working with people, needing to hone those personal, social, emotional skills just as much as the management skills and the academic skills. They're probably more important, I think, not to your ability to do the job, always it depends, but to maintain it, to be resilient, and to go further and deeper, to take a group of people with you, I think really being able to connect with people in that way, the mindful awareness helps you to be able to do that in many ways. So I feel like that's really important. And what we want then, is leaders of schools who understand this for themselves, that it can be beneficial for them, but also that they value their teachers, taking care of themselves. They try and reassure them. It doesn't mean you've got to take care of your teachers. A school where well-being is seen as crucial, important, is not necessarily that the school is always taking care of you as a teacher, but it values educators taking care of themselves. It's very explicit about that message.
Yeah.
Because you understand the importance of that and the social neuroscience that points to that, the impact that this can have on the classroom, your sensitivity with students and colleagues.
Right.
So I think it's the best professional development you could get for their teachers. To do an 8-week mindfulness course for themselves is so powerful, for some people transformational.
Yeah.
And then, you're beginning to try and model this yourself a little bit, not to be perfect, but to try and slow down a little bit during the day every now and then, put that break on, engage the parasympathetic nervous system as you love to do, and have a school environment where you begin to see through this lens of well-being, so that you're not trying to just shorten the break so you can fit more curriculum time. What does a kind school feel like? How does it feel for kids? How do you see everything through that lens? Academic results drive a school. That's a big part of the school's function, of course. But alongside that, an interest and commitment to well-being for the community can be an important driver. And I think more schools are wanting to do that, either because they see that, or because they're seeing so much stress in older students, especially, and it's kind of getting younger, and anxiety issues.
Absolutely.
You don't always know where to start, that's the tricky bit.
And I think so much burnout among the staff. I mean, certainly in the States we have, I can't remember, I should have looked it up before doing this, but it's like, 1 in 3 teachers or something like that drops out in the first 5 years, out of teaching. So it's, that's tremendously expensive, but it's also, has a tremendous social cost, and, all these people feeling like they failed, and, and I mean, there's so many consequences in terms of institutional memory and the culture of a school, but I imagine that's true to some extent everywhere in the world, that there's these high rates of turnover. And when the leadership in the school can can practice some degree of mindfulness, self-reflection, build their own emotional intelligence, I do think that then spreads to the other leaders in the school, that then spreads to the other teachers, and that then ultimately spreads to the kids and to the parents as well, right? So that you have this whole healthy, well community that often I think so much does start with the self-care and the mindfulness of the leaders in the building. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think part of what we try to do when we work with schools is just to emphasize that, that from the social neuroscience, from what we are learning, how important the job of the teacher is in the way that you connect with kids, how you are. What we say is that how I am is just as important as what I teach.
Right. Absolutely.
About how we connect with kids and how they learn through relationship.
Yeah.
That there's individual kids that sometimes we can impact without even trying to sometimes, because of being more present and being more socially aware. Kids sometimes are looking for that on a subconscious level. Models of ways of reattuning or connecting, attaching to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it is that, like, kids are looking for that, we can call it a corrective experience. Or I was talking to Dan Siegel in this last week, and he was talking about are our brains really like a form of antenna that are seeking out this connection in some way? And I think all of that is so much built on, right, the quality of the adult's presence and the quality of the adult's self-regulation and their mindfulness to a large extent.
Absolutely.
You did, when I saw you speak in Austria last year, you did such a good job, I felt like, of really explaining some of that, of that social, social neuroscience of what's going on for the teachers and the educators and how that impacts the kids. You explained it so well that I've been struggling to try to bring that into my talks in a way that's not nearly as articulate as you were up on that stage when I saw you. But could you share a little bit about that? I don't remember if you remember exactly what you said either, but just about what's going on with social neuroscience and why that's so important. I guess you kind of summed it up with how we are is just as important as what we teach, but can you say more about that?
Yeah, I just think of that and trying to work. I remember showing the Ian Wright video, which my son Billy sent to me many years ago, because we're both mad on soccer. But I would recommend people, when we're just talking about that attachment to teachers, look on YouTube and look at Ian Wright, that's W-R-I-G-H-T. Ian Wright Gets a Shock, it's called on video. Ian Wright meets Mr. Pigden when he reconnects with his primary school teacher, who was such a key influence in his life, which is true for many people, but you see it played out almost, actually physically, this attachment between this young kid and this teacher is shown even though he's an adult. And Ian Wright, as a successful soccer player he credits all of that, really, most of it, to his teacher who he just connected with those antennae that he needed at that time.
Right.
So
right.
What we learn from, especially that great book by Louis Cozzolino, The Social Mindfulness Education, is that it's very overly simplified. Of course, all these brain models aren't they? But that we're born with a prefrontal cortex that doesn't fully develop till mid-20s, late 20s.
Right.
Amygdala, with those antennae that scan the environment for threat, are fully formed at birth. So what a difficult situation that we're in, when we don't have any ability to regulate our own emotions, but we are very aware of threat around us. And how do we survive that? Well, of course, because we don't have to regulate our own emotions, because our carers in those early days and weeks do that for us. We're impacting our parents, but our parents are impacting us on a deep level.
Right.
Actually, as Cozzolino calls it, the parent is sculpting the brain of the child. He's laid down. Those are formed by those relationships. So the human infant is predisposed to learn through relationship with adults. And in a sense, when a teacher steps into a room, an adult with a bunch of kids, those kids are already wired, even though it often doesn't feel like this is a teacher, hardwired to learn from an adult.
Right.
So that's the human way that we do it.
Yeah.
So we work with the grain of the brain in that way, and we pay attention to how we are with kids and how we connect with them, and there's more chances of engaging them in that way. And our presence is so key to that, and mindfulness in some ways is a training in presence, which is very valuable for teachers.
Right.
Some people have it naturally, charismatically, Others like me, you have to train at it.
Have to work at it. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So you can use that understanding of evolutionary predispositions in a sense, and become what he calls a neuroscientific sculptor. That's what I tell teachers on TV. Teachers are neuroscientific sculptors.
I love it. Yeah.
Doing important work.
Yeah. 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 And I just love how you describe that just so succinctly in a way that, I mean, in a sense, it's so obvious, but we forget it all the time, and we forget it constantly the more stressed out we are, right? We know that about our brains, right? We get stressed out, we go back into threat mode. This kid's driving me crazy. Like, why are they doing that? They're trying to ruin my lesson, right? And forget to back up, take a few breaths, slow down, and see it as they're seeking and struggling to connect in some way, or they are, it's my job to tune into them, not their job to figure out how to tune into me, or it's a dance. It's obviously both of us, but again, that does so much start with us, the adult, figuring out how do we tune in our antenna to what this kid's needs are, what, the way that they've maybe been sculpted, and how can we help sculpt them toward a more healthy future, especially those dysregulated kids with disrupted attachments or other struggles that they've maybe had in some ways. So, yeah.
And what I got a lot from your presentation, because we've traded off of that since then. But, maybe you can just say, I know the quote, but about stressed out kids and adults.
Yeah. I think I always say, like the best way to create, or is it, people always ask me, like, how do you create a mindful school or mindful kids? And certainly creating stressed out kids is easy. You just surround them with stressed out, miserable, burned out adults. And so therefore, the best way to create more mindful, present, and compassionate kids is really to surround them with mindful, present, and compassionate adults, to really plant the seeds in that soil of present, mindful adults. And it's so true. And it's just another way of articulating, I think, the same idea. And that's what's so fun, like having met you in Austria last year, is like, oh, he says it in this way, like so much better than I do. And maybe you're thinking the same thing, or just now talking to people from all over the world and hearing how do they talk about it in an international school, or how do they talk about it in this culture or in this language. It's been a blast. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing everything. Yeah.
So how else do you feel like we can really bring change to school cultures around the world? What are your thoughts on this? We'll close out in a couple more minutes after that.
Sure. I think what you're onto there. The soil. The way that we bring, and we forget kids when we are natural beings, we're as natural as a tree or a plant, we have the same kind of needs, sunshine, water, and nourishment, it's so I think that takes me back to this whole sense of, what is the purpose of a school? And we get so lost in the narrative, I think through the 20th century, the narrative of what is the purpose of a school just got lost, totally lost. And progressive schools and alternative, they've kind of kept that flame alive of what can school really be about? And I think we need to keep coming back to that central purpose. And so we're trying to shift the culture of our schools, I believe. We want schools to be different. And it's a job in partnership with parents of helping young people grow and prosper and develop. When you don't focus on making a kid grow, like you don't make a plant grow.
Right. You can't force it. Create the conditions. Yeah.
And when, interestingly, talking to people around the world, we always try to do a little thing, I don't know if we did it in Austria or not, but about what really matters in a school and what we really want for our children, to get to those deeper questions. And when we get people onto a heart level for a moment, it doesn't matter where we're talking to them. It can be, a group of suburban parents in China, or it can be some, privileged parents in an embassy school somewhere, or it can be, people living in a deprived area in the UK. It doesn't make any difference. When you ask parents, what is it that you want? You've got young kids yourself. What do you deep down want for your kids? What do they come up with? What do you want for your kids on a deep level? Thinking of them growing up, what is it you want for them?
I mean, really to find happiness and contentment and know where to keep finding that, know the roots of that, in a sense. Yeah.
Exactly. We ask this question, we put them up. It's always that happy, well-being, to be healthy, to be safe, to be secure, to be confident in themselves, to have self-esteem. You know, it's a variety of things, but it's not a huge range. They come from the heart.
Right.
You know,
Right.
the qualities that we want for our kids. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves about that. And I think mindful awareness training and social emotional learning could help, you know, bring us back to some of those areas. And it's not about we're all going so fast. You know, this is actually about putting on that brake and slowing down a little bit.
Yeah.
We help teachers understand, you know, sometimes it's about training mindfulness courses.
Mm-hmm.
About, as our colleague Kristen used to use in her school in Phuket, it's about seasoning the day with mindful moments, you know. So
yeah.
not just teaching,
Seasoning the day. I love that.
Punctuating the day. You know, my hand's tingling in the hallway. That's an important moment for me.
Right, right.
We find that for a teacher or for a kid within a busy day.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things to do, but there are ways you can help yourselves just slow down a little bit. And part of that then is learning to listen. Yourself and listening to other people, learning to connect with other people. And we actually see, you know, when we talk about change in schools and shifting that focus on the culture, like a new strategic plan. Let's have a mindfulness plan and an SEL here, or I think of like a dialogue in which we're beginning to talk and listen on a slightly deeper level.
Yeah.
So you can find ways of, you know, there's techniques, counsel practice, nonviolent communication, where we can begin to the schools processes. You know, these things, cognitive coaching, these things overlap a lot, I think. These ways to really listen to each other more deeply and to, you know, have a conversation about well-being and include students and parents in that. The dialogue then leads us to understanding more where we're going and why we want to do it.
Yeah.
We can churn out clever people by the score, you know, clever people who have amazing technological benefits, and we need all that stuff for sure. But unless you have wisdom as well, you know, then that's a dangerous combination, being clever and powerful. You know, of Greta Thunberg. I don't know where she gets her wisdom from, but, you know, Greta, who's speaking up about climate change at the moment. Right. You know, there's a wise child, you know, and we need to listen to wise children, actually, as well as how to use them, because, you know, they can tell us some stuff that we really need to hear about.
Wise and neuroatypical. I mean, I think also is so interesting about her. Yeah.
Neurodiverse, being the beauty of that, and how we need to hear those different perspectives. Such an important area. So in a way, I feel like a mindful school is a listening school, and you know, listening is such a key element of learning. These are practical skills, aren't they, for a school?
Right.
Something to add on at the end of the day. We're talking about moving this stuff into the day as moments, but also into the content of what we do, into our physical exercises, into sports, learning focusing techniques, relation, you know, awareness. These things are of crucial value to young people in learning. Yeah.
Well, you couldn't have said it any better. Perfect way to kind of finish up. Just lastly, like what, you know, so you've moved from Prague, now you're in Valencia, you and Amy, that's right?
Yeah, and it's so hot here. And I turned the air conditioning off for this because it was too noisy, so I'm getting a bit warm here.
So I certainly want to visit you there. I'm sure other people do. What are you going to be doing in Valencia? Are you going to be running retreats or putting on workshops or just being based out of there? What are your plans?
We could continue to work in China and in a few European countries, but we're beginning to look for opportunities here in Spain. And in January, we're going to be offering some mindfulness courses to psychologists here in Valencia. And actually in Madrid, in next April, we're doing, we've been wanting to do this for 3 years now. We're starting our first Cultivating Mindful Leadership, a training course for school leaders or aspiring school leaders. To exactly what we were talking about earlier on. So we're trying to go into a course. And we would like to start running more retreats. We've been to some nice retreat centers nearby. I think what we've enjoyed most of the last few years is, you know, when we get with 30 teachers for 4 or 5 days, which we did a couple of times recently in Switzerland last year, you get a chance to go a bit deeper, you know. And we've done some of these with translation as well, and it's worked just as well. So I think we want to do more of that. Can we find spaces for teachers to do a partial retreat, partial workshop, where we introduce or deepen these skills, you know, sharing personal practice, but also ways of working with kids, you know, and how do you season the day and that kind of thing.
Right. Beautiful. So
Yeah,
if people want to get...
people to Valencia.
Yeah.
Great, it's a beautiful city. It's a wonderful place.
Near the beach and everything.
Maybe.
So if people want to get more in touch with you and learn more about you, what's your website, and how else can folks get in touch who maybe want some consultation from you or some workshops from you? Where can people go to get more info?
Yeah, of course. Our website, which Amy and I have put together, is mindwelleducation.org.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go there, Amy's email is there, my email is there.
Great.
And you can see the kind of things we've been doing in different places and some information about the kind of work that we do. And some of our colleagues now that we've got associates in other countries as well who are beginning. We've got Lena in South America who's doing mindful sports training with schools as well.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So yeah, we got the book. There's a lot in the book.
Mm-hmm. And maybe a few more books coming. I hear.
We might be writing another book on more focused on classroom practice and implementation.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add, or?
No, I'm just really excited that you're doing this with Helen. These are so valuable, and I'm looking forward to seeing the whole thing. And yeah, we hope to have you and some of the other presenters come out to Spain sometime to do some work with us here.
Works for me. Fantastic. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.
Take care.